Good morning, brothers and sisters. It's a great Sunday. Beautiful sunshine greeting us this morning, great weather. Can't complain about too much nowadays in the summer. And as the slide said, welcome, and we are definitely glad that you could make it here this morning and be here in fellowship with your other brothers and sisters. Today, as you know, our church has started going over the book of Daniel, has started doing kind of a small group style in the evening services, going over the book of Daniel. And I was asked this morning to prepare a little message about the topic that was discussed last evening, to do it in English and to just kind of touch on one specific topic out of Daniel chapter 2. And what I'm going to be talking about, the topic that I'm going to be touching, is the king's problem. Not only not knowing the meaning of his dream, but forgetting his dream altogether. That's going to be one topic that I'll be touching, and a few subtopics under that. But last week, one of our brothers had started looking at Daniel chapter 2, and in Daniel chapter 2, we have the story of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream and how he is trying to get it interpreted to him. And he asks all of his magicians and his astrologists, his sorcerers, all these people to come in. Everyone he thinks of who can help him interpret this dream. And none of them are able to provide the help that he is looking for in understanding his dream that he had. And this angers him, this frustrates him. And until finally in the end, Daniel is able to provide the answer that King Nebuchadnezzar was looking for. And what I was asked is to look at specifically the topic of the king's dream and what was the problem here that the king was facing. If we could just break it down and see what was wrong, what happened, the way he approached this problem, this situation, and how ultimately it got resolved, and how we can apply this story and examples from this story into our own lives. And so let's just start off by opening our Bibles and following along from, again, the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. Братья, если можно высветить текст от Даниила, 2 глава, с 1 стиха, и мы будем читать из этой главы эту историю. And again, I'll be reading from Daniel chapter 2, starting from verse 1, and we'll go through 5 to start off. I'll be reading in the New Living Translation, just in case if anyone was wondering. One night during the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such disturbing dreams that he couldn't sleep. He called in his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, and he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. As they stood before the king, he said, "I have had a dream that deeply troubles me, and I must know what it means." When the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, "Long live the king. Tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means." But the king said to the astrologers, "I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble." Now, I want to address a few points this morning from this chapter, and in the end, we will wrap up in prayer. The first thing I want us to look at is that King Nebuchadnezzar knew and understood he had a meaningful dream, but he couldn't remember what it was. The king had called in everyone who he thought could help, and when they had asked him to explain the dream to him, he couldn't do it. And as we saw, he became frustrated and demanded that they tell him what it was and what it meant. And the way King Nebuchadnezzar acted kind of reminds me of how kids sometimes act with one another when they approach a group of friends and there's something that the friends can't figure out, and that one child will be like, I know the answer. And so the other kids will ask, well, what is it? What is it? And he says, I don't want to tell you. I want to see if you know. But in reality, the kid doesn't know at all the answer of what they're looking for. He just wants to make it seem like he knows. He wants to make himself look smarter, look more educated in a way. And the way King Nebuchadnezzar acted here was in the same way. In these moments, when the king begins to become angry, it shows how large his ego is. He wanted answers for a dream that he had, but he couldn't even explain the dream that he had because he couldn't remember what it was. And the example that we can take from here is to always make sure to keep our own egos in check, not to act and to pretend like we know everything. We don't have to know everything, and we don't have to have all the answers to everything. God doesn't demand that from us. But what he does want is a humble heart. He wants one that knows that sometimes you need not to lean on your own understanding, but seek counsel from God and not others. Just like it reads in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, you all know this verse. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. And this leads me to the second point that I wanted to touch on, and that was that the king is searching in people for an answer that they can't provide for him. King Nebuchadnezzar clearly had a dream that was of a very important meaning, and he didn't know what it meant. Instead of leaning on God for answers, he called in all of his magicians and sorcerers and people who could not provide that answer that he was searching for. On the other hand, if we continue to read more into the story, we see how Daniel approaches the situation when he tries to explain the dream to the king. And now I want to go ahead in the book of Daniel chapter 2, and I want to read from verse 17 to 23 about how Daniel approached this situation. Again, Daniel chapter 2, verses 17 to 23. Then Daniel went home and told his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret, so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. That night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. He said, praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in darkness, though he is surrounded by light. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we asked of you and revealed to us what the king demanded. Daniel goes to his friends and tells them the situation, and the first thing that they all do is they bring it to God. They bring the situation to God and ask him to provide the answer. The king's first response was seek answer from his peers, while Daniel's first response was seek answers from God. One circumstance brings anger and frustration, and the other brings confidence and answers. Take example from Daniel, and don't search for answers from others, but bring it to God. The third point that I want to take note of is that after the king attempts to find his answers in his peers, he becomes angry and starts to make rash decisions. Do you ever notice yourself making wise decisions when you are angry? Or does it more often than not lead you to make a mistake in the heat of the moment? I know for me usually, if something frustrates me or angers me a little bit, it's better for me to just stop and cool off a little bit, take a deep breath before I do anything else, just so I don't do anything that maybe I would regret later on. In the end of the chapter, when Daniel reveals what God had showed him about the king's dream, the king realizes that the God that Daniel believes in is the only one that is able to provide him the answer he was searching for. And the king, he could have avoided all the anger and frustration that he had if only he had faith in God to be able to provide the answer that he was looking for to his dream. To finish off this morning's message that I had prepared, I see in this story in Daniel chapter 2 how two people handled a situation in a similar way but wound up with two completely different outcomes. Both had come to people for help in figuring out an answer. The first person, King Nebuchadnezzar, had gone to a group of people who claimed to be able to read and interpret dreams and visions, but in reality were incapable of doing any of that and had no personal relationship with Christ. And the second person, Daniel, went to a group of friends also, and the first thing he asked them to do was pray with him And the second person, Daniel, went to a group of friends also, and the first thing he asked them to do was pray with him to ask God to show mercy to them and show them what the dream meant. Many times we find ourselves looking and trying to get answers from people who simply can't provide them for you. And so ask yourself whether you're asking the right people for help or not. Whether that group of people really are able to take the same steps that Daniel and his friends took in trying to get an answer. Would that group of people also take the same approach of saying, let's stop, let's pray, let's see what God has to say? Or would they try to kind of find their own answer to the problem? How many times has someone told you, or you've heard someone say, through prayer and through the Word of God, you can find answers to your questions? But how many of you have ever really tried to do that in your lives? Ultimately, relying on people for answers will lead to frustration and anger because people don't always have all the answers. But leaning on God and His Word, that's a source that will always lead you to get answers that you're looking for, to opening up the truth to you. That's what you want to build your foundation on. Take example from David in this story and trust in the Lord and don't lean on your own understanding. Amen, brothers and sisters? Please, let's stand and finish off in prayer. If you would like to quickly say a prayer, feel free and I will finish off in the end.